Hello and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me to the next Battlerite Champion Spotlight. My name is Wilky, and today we are going to take a look at Varesh the Eternal, or for the seasoned BLC player, this is the Inhibitor. Now let's just dive straight into his first ability. That one is Hand of Corruption. It deals 10 damage, it heals himself for 2 health, and it inflicts the enemy with Corruption, and Corruption reduces damage and healing done by 15% for 5 seconds. It's a bit of a unique feature because unlike a bar above the enemy's head, the buffs or debuffs Varesh applies to the enemy are displayed as these circles, and we're just gonna take a look at the second one straight away. But for reference, the Corruption debuff is this light blue circle which then depletes. His second ability, right click, is Hand of Judgment, which fires a projectile that deals 24 damage, and it deals Judgment, or inflicts Judgment, and Judgment increases the damage taken by 15% for 5 seconds, and similar to his left click, but instead of a blue one, you can see a purple-ish circle around the enemy. Now his right click has a relatively long windup, but it deals a fair amount of damage, so should you apply both of these, you'll see that both of these circles will actually start ticking off. His spacebar is Inhibitor's Guard, which basically, as his namesake goes, applies a shield to himself or an ally for 28 damage, relatively long cooldown, and since he doesn't have any dodging or movement ability by default, he is kind of susceptible to damage similar in a way that the Alchemist or Lucy is. However, as I said, you can apply this to yourself or even allies, making him somewhat supporty and quite sustain you with his self-heal. His Q is Wuju, which is basically a counter, and we're just going to take a look. I'm going to travel a bit faster here, which basically is a counter that, there we go, that basically teleports you behind the enemy, stunning them for 0.5 seconds for a short duration, and dealing 10 damage. His E ability is Shatter. This one's actually fairly new if you're used to the old Inhibitor. Shatter basically explodes in a relatively decent radius. Should the enemy be afflicted by either Corruption or Judgment or both, this one, or Shatter, will actually consume these charges and deal either extra damage or heal you. In the case of Corruption, you'll be healed for 8 health and the target will be slowed. Should the target be inflicted by Judgment, it'll deal another 8 damage and it will silence the target. So should we apply left click, or in this case Corruption, to the enemy, our Shatter will slow the enemy. Should we apply right click, which is Corruption, our Shatter will silence the enemy. You can actually have both at the same time. I'm not sure if I'm actually able to afflict a target with both, but let's take a look. We're just gonna go ahead with right and then left click. And yeah, it's probably gonna kill the enemy. Yeah, it is. But in that case, they would both be silenced and snared. So it is a very powerful tool and can be kind of tricky to use. It has 2 charges, but once you realize how this works and everything, this is a very good tool to both CC the enemy and deal additional damage. Alright, let's take a look at his X abilities. His first X ability is going to change his right click into Hand of Punishment, which then deals 12 damage and heals you for 6 health, afflicting the enemy with both Judgment and Corruption. So this one's very good if you want to place both debuffs on the enemy for 25 energy. It has a similar cast animation than the left click, so it doesn't wind up as long as the right click. However, it doesn't deal as much damage, it heals you for 6 health, and it applies both debuffs to the enemy. His second X ability is going to change his Shatter into Crush, and it doesn't consume any charges then anymore, but it will knock enemies back. So should you apply this, you can see that the color will be changed from red to bluish, and then the enemy will be knocked back. His third X ability is Reform. This is his only proper mobility tool, not counting his counter, which basically allows you to, in a moderate distance, so the radius is not too big. The good thing about this skill is that the enemy has no visual cue on where you want to go. You basically just fall apart, and if you just wait to fall apart, you don't really give away any sort of direction. So this is a very good tool. And unlike most other mobility tools, you can actually just do a short jump. You might even do it at the same spot to confuse the enemy. So this is your only true mobility tool you have. It comes at the cost of 25 energy and at a 15-second cooldown. Should the enemies be afflicted with any of the debuffs, it'll, similar to Shatter, will either heal you or deal damage and silence the target. Now his ultimate, Powers Combine, is a very strong ultimate, but also kinda tricky to land, especially since it needs to hit an enemy in order to fully function. Now basically what this does, it'll deal 24 damage and inflict both Judgment and Corruption. Should you hit an enemy with the first initial dash, you will be rewarded with another dash, and should you hit the second one, then another up to maximum of 3 times. You're completely invulnerable after you move. However, you're very susceptible to CCs or stuns at the beginning. Also, the rather long windup might make it a bit difficult to actually catch opponents, because the range isn't that great. But once you actually land more than one shot, this can be quite devastating, and as I said, it leaves you completely immune to anything during the animation once you hit the enemy. Anyways, this is all about the Varesh skill set. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the next spotlight. Stay tuned for more. Stunlock Studios announced that they will probably release 2 more champions in October, so might not be too long, might be within the next 2 weeks or so. We will see about that, so stay tuned for that, and hopefully see you guys in the next champion spotlight.